Gertrude, I shall never forget you, my only friend. How little was the time we had in the end. We cannot catch up now, nor ever draw level with the future. Without you at the helm, where will it go? Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails. Only your song is bearing me along into another world, here where I stand, where you once stood, without anyone to take my hand. For there in the minds of the living, memory lives on. Forever young, you sat there, bowed with your ancestral pain, and for far too long, that last afternoon, the future as far as you could see, destined never to leave that place, left there with the wind in your face. And as you rose, you stumbled sideways, and yet would not be comforted. You thought it might be hypothermia. From then on, we were forced to turn you away, and from then on, nothing again would ever be the same. Flow, river, flow, flow to the sea. Then somehow you came from the royal free, sent out to tell the world just as you'd been told, without the time to turn around in, without even the words to say your name. Gertrude, it's too cold today, you can't stay. It's cancer, I'm not staying anyway. Love that is the pain, that is not of this world. It is an infinity from which I cannot break free. Not Gertrude, not her. We were drawn to each other, I am sure, by the love we had, each of us, for a mother who suffered in silence and in travail, and yet most surely learned to love. For we were loved, and Gertrude's life was like a kaleidoscope, revolving around a single beam of light, shot through the long corridor of time without end, settling, ever changing, the still point around which everything else moved. Unalterable, the lasting finality of it all. You could not know Gertrude without being aware of the weight of the Holocaust within her. Its shadow walked beside her most days in the last days of that summer. Talking in the rain, her mind would return yet again to the life of her mother, the sole survivor of her family, who perished at the edge of their village early on in the final solution. Her father's story was the same. They both survived, and Gertrude would grow with the depths of their sorrow upon her. In Brooklyn, as a girl, then from Antioch to UCL, bowed under the enormity of hell. If you'd lived, you would have had much to say about the lane, vacant throughout winter, as if no more than a chance happening, a stage on which the play came to an end in the middle of its run, with no last night for the critics to remark upon, shuttered and abandoned and left as though no one had bothered to show, and with no one to take your place, with nowhere to go. There is only her lowering echo, an audience to wonder then in vain, even as the placards call out her name. The protest, if only I could explain, as if its time would never come again. It's too late now to put anything right. Time is awry. I live a prisoner of a poem, bound about by echoes ebbing, while the toll of the levelling future grows all the more severe. The future flows into another time, an unknown reality. I stand on the banks with nowhere to go, while the day makes its own way without looking back. The end alone guides me, and without so much as a cue to respond to, or anything to hold on to, I can never catch up now, or ever draw level with what is gone. You got nothing back for your labour. I have to get it right, if only to explain somehow, before the words begin to wane. What I would have given to be with you, sat before the barriers, beside you on the bench once more, the evening drawing in, and people hurrying on their way, and us oblivious and trawling through history, or grave in the shadow of its aftermath by the light at the end of the day. What hand were you dealt that you had to die so wretched, and yet so soon, and with so much left that you still had to do, and with so much to give, so much to win through to, and so much taken away? There was not enough time to explain why, without even the time to say goodbye. And what I would give to be able to return, to take up where you left off once more. Those days, will they ever come again, except as a lowering echo in my mind, a residual light left on in a time to come that I can only turn away from, the lane then too narrow to horizon, a battle lost and won in a no man's land of its own, and fought for and lost all over again. I could not fight them all, and the placards were gone, and the protest at half-mast without you. A memory once in an empty lane, as if its time would never come again. Those days and their kind, that I simply walked away from, with all you believed in left behind, marooned, abandoned, and yet as a cocoon that would unwind. I had to leave it to erect a monument out of the protest and its argument. Without you, the protest became too much to bear, nor could I tell your story there. And though it looks abandoned now, and for all the world to see, an ordinary lane somewhere in Hampstead, its time is yet to be. Gertrude, someday, in the time to come, we shall be there just as we were in those days. You destined to stay forever young, and tirelessly there with the placards, quietly listening, but taking it all in, just as you had always done, right from the time you were young to the bitter end. If you'd lived, it would not have been in vain. Those days in the rain left now to arraign. Those days in the rain, how shall I even know myself again? I who could not go with her would be left to follow after, as though I could ever catch up with her, or begin to explain, without the words to wonder, without the future just to weigh against the day, with only her death to set a course by, either from or yet towards the bitter days left to arraign. How can I return without the poem, without rhythm enough to say along the way how much I miss her? Without her, how shall I protest in the years to come? Yet I have to get it right, to set the record straight, and let her keep up to date with after and before, with the long, slow, isolate hours that lay in between, and with what was taken from her, tardily, without any warning, what it entailed, and the protest so brutally derailed. But I cannot put it right, nor ever alter the ending, only echoing despair. So many were the hours I spent immobilized and wondering, waiting without an answer, without a reason. And whether it was night or day at all, I could not tell. Time was an enemy held to ransom, or plundered for the hell of it, and the mute futility of the future, even as the words began to fray. I wasted so much more, trying to put it right. Days would be barter for a phrase, a single word for a night, borne along on an ebb tide, without any end in sight, or stranded on the banks of it all, besieged by a sense of exile and longing beyond recall, and pitched in a fight with time that would not come again, a current drifting to and fro in vain, fought for to the end, until the words wane. There is no refuge when morning breaks, with nothing to show for my labour, only a fugitive yet overwhelming sense of exile. Its longing keeps me going, torn between the need to get your story told, and month by month a protest left on hold, about to fold without my knowing. I let you down by simply not showing. Not for a moment have I not been there, with you beside me, the wind in your hair. If I must go back at all, let it be for her only, so that I might carry her burden from the day she was forced to lay it down. We have come so far, Gertrude, so far that now there is no turning back. You would not go gently into that good night, whatever would unfold after, nor would you rest a while untold, still calling out to us, urging us onward to yet another tomorrow, even as he rowed you down that river, leaving Lethe behind you forever. I sat at the protest once with your ashes in the cold, and could not keep you, nor leave you untold. Sometimes I hardly know which way to go. There is no signpost for miles around, nor any pathway to horizon, circling, ever widening, whichever way I turn, inexorably drawing me in. Time is always out in front, tarrying a while, or casually leaning on its own shadow, as though I could ever catch up now, with nothing to show for my labour, the hours falling back, moment by moment, as I wonder, without knowing, whether I shall reach the finishing line, or bring the beginning back to the end, with the time I borrowed only to lend. It hurts that the protest is still on hold, and that nothing more could be done back then. Alone and without her, and left with her death, I could not fight them all. Waylaid and besieged for 6 months after, until they won. It was over, and now everyone could know that in the lane, at the very heart of Hampstead, the right to protest had been in vain. Another death had happened, and it followed in the wake of Gertrude. Before her dust had settled into place, free speech was dead, and not a trace of it could be found, only an echo to sound its existence surfacing underground. For 6 months the protest has occupied my mind, and not for a moment have I not been there, as I tried to find something approaching meaning from an unforeseen, ordinary devastation. And yet, looking back, with an aftermath so far-reaching, not a trace of its existence was left behind, or anything to show that Gertrude had died. What was there to know? Would anyone remember anything from so long ago, passing to and fro. Only in its history could it throw the permanent shadow of effacement, the right to protest and what it had meant. The right to protest was not meant to be enacted. It was in reality but an idea, even a weapon to turn upon itself when before a placarded imaginary war, not something to lay one's life on the line for. It survived to be betrayed, the paper it was written on, and no more, then held imprisoned in the unturned pages once the ink had dried. This much we were denied. Freedom was rounded up and found to be guilty as charged. Humanity was in jeopardy and protest was underground. Was it for this her life was lost and found? I seem to have lived the whole of my life in these last 6 months, helplessly waiting for the words to come just to free me from their burden. And no amount of longing was to any avail, endlessly caught in the strands of existence and enmeshed beyond my knowing. A moth spiralling into the light, I had to navigate the night alone, with only silence for an answer and an end that would never come. The future was what I could bring, a time that was lost in passing and in vain. I could not live again except in dreams, in a world where nothing is what it seems. For the first time since walking away, I can say to myself, I want to go back and lay down the dead weight of foreboding, unutterable and at its utmost. Why was I so afraid, and without an answer then or now? I could try somehow as once, after an overdose, to find the courage to stay, less afraid back then of myself than of finding the day now without you. I who had wanted only to die could not go back to the protest, fearing and afraid, unable to say how much I miss you, and with little choice to see with your eyes and speak with your voice. At times it seemed as if we were flying, and though it rained as high as the hilt of summer, it could not bring us down, while day by day we were allowed to stay, as if no more than as luck would have it, as though even Hampstead still held sway. You never questioned why it was, but they never came for the placards while you were there, who in your heyday tramped from door to door for years collecting money for the cause. Who could know then that in your final year you would call in your last chip to try and save us? For so high we were at the end, so high that we never saw you waving goodbye. Some kind of a protester or even a bag lady sitting on a bench in all weathers. That's how they saw me, Gertrude. That's how I saw myself, as little more. And my life had been unremarkable until then, when something turned me around and shook me so hard, nothing was the same again. I could stand there instead and tell the world what was happening from a lane in Hampstead, how the nameless in Camden wander through a day which is endless and untold, with a shadow to call their own, to hold on to, an echo of a name no one wants to know. Nothing was the same. Was it for this she sat there in the cold, until she couldn't take it any more? For this, day after day, yet quietly waiting, and while the rest of her life drained away. Gertrude, they did it anyway, and there was nothing more you could have done. You saw it all, and as though it had been foreseen, until mental health in Camden was no more. That the very scaffolding would fall, even as you drew your last breath, was something you would take with you, along with the casual futility of it all. But you were there, right from the start, giving it everything, straight from the heart. You could hardly bear to give up the fight, but everything was taken from you. I tried to keep you up to date on the ward, so near and so far, as you lay within reach of the protest you would never see again. At 82, you had come through, as if you were as good as new. The years, their loneliness, were now quite suddenly behind you, and the future was what you could bring in a few short months without your knowing. I would live the whole of my life in the time I knew you. And yet after, with no one at the helm, we were a crew destined just to fall to earth without you. You foresaw it all as you sat there. No wonder you didn't care. You could afford not to, and with so little time ahead, it never occurred to you, even for a moment, whatever it was that was thought or said, and you never heard it, as you steered our frail craft into the future and into the storm in front. Each day was what you would bring in a last effort to offset time, then narrowing and closing behind us, while before us tomorrow rose from the impenetrable unlit shadows of the end, and what would follow after, the hours left to flow to and fro. To and fro, the hours would be left to flow. Whatever would unfold after, those days and their kind would not come again. The lane would be stripped bare and divested there in the full and rapid flare of morning. They took them when my back was turned, and when you yourself could no longer be there. Gertrude, they did it because they could, and I let it happen, and all you were alive for, all you had stood for, lay under their feet, as the placards, torn from the railings, were binned as litter there and then behind us. Nothing would assuage your wind-borne image, lost and found as unforgotten salvage. How long must I remain without the end, helplessly lost or left among the sheer unfathomed depths of your story? Without her to call to, how shall I come up for air as I turn and turn about under the dead weight of the future, too far out to ever turn back now? I navigate an uncharted world, time that will not come again, that was never meant to have been in vain, and how it suddenly became the unforeseen endgame of existence. As the day began to stall, she saw all the way to the end, how it would unfold after, why I could not leave her untold. You could not think of anything to say after the news was broken. Anyway, for you, time was already in the past tense when you spoke about being damaged goods. Mostly, it was the far-off look on your face of another place other than this, which was left behind to remind us of a day which nothing would allay. If only you'd been given more time, the space enough to efface the way you were told, or the routine surface words for the end. In a moment, everything was taken away. The future was an edifice left to fall, to vanish without a trace. Unforgotten salvage, lost and then found. How can I return without you, without the words to wonder, with the rhythm of another time always at my back, an incoming infinite black tide bearing me along, the mute rhyme of the future echoing beneath your song? You have gone, and you're not coming back again, even in dreams wherein I search the low sunless shadow, a world left behind from before that I shall not know again. Nothing came from any of it, there where I falter after, fearing an affray in the lane, while I try to save the placards in vain. Without the protest, I would not have known how in its infinity, its very longing, regret can alter time after. How a life and death, in sudden and brief equilibrium, became as a poised trapeze act, aligned on the edge of time. Nothing again would ever be the same, except an attendant planetary darkness that seemed to draw me in as though in passing, even as she lay dying, between then and now never to let go, encircling horizon with its shadow. Nothing came from any of it, and yet but for those days we would never have met. If only this burden could be lifted from me, if only she could have lived. How can I find the right words for the things which cannot be said? How can I ever reach the end without her waiting there instead? How shall I leave this maze, or resurrect in their entirety all the vanished days, now that she is dead? And how shall I remember when it is easier to forget? Mute futility drives me, and the anonymity she was left in, the future set against time, falling back in the flow of an ebb tide to and fro, the enervate weight of its own echo. If I should falter before I get there, would it have been worth it after all? With so little time to turn around in, as the poem begins to stall. Who am I to imagine that whatever happened there, anyone would care? And what am I, anyway, to even think of going there? Each night I lose more ground as the day falls abruptly away and without me, while the hours bend inwardly back as they veer away from the sheer affray of tomorrow, left behind with a time that will not come. The end is so far off, and now there is nowhere else to go. Its abode is found at the next corner of time, a journey to be wished for, and yet at the utmost reach of the world it is the only place I know. We have come so far, there is no turning back. Here, where I throw no shadow, either from or towards, and life itself seems out of earshot on the far side of dreams. Whatever there is to bestow is left for a future more precarious than any of us know. For we write for the sheer hell of it and for tomorrow. Was any of it worth it, after all? You offering yourself for no applause, your last year a sacrifice for the cause. So near and so far, how shall I ever know, except in passing, whatever it was, that it could be so casually left behind, as though it hardly mattered any more, allowing each day to slip away without my knowing. If only I could have seen just how little there was when weighed against its own infinity after. The darkness that prevailed, to have heard even for a moment the lasting, lingering shortfall of the years that were destined to be so precipitately curtailed, yet I never once let it in. Beside me you were quietly dying. The inexorable weight of it all, before and after, as planetary darkness seeped through the hours, overwhelming the past with a distant future that was left behind forever beyond my grasp, while its fathoms rose through the floor of my mind, and what I had known was at an end, as I faltered alone in dreams, searching for a time that would not come, and a life that became the mirror for my own, the very moment it was taken from her. The anonymity of the abyss. I could not know that it would come to this, her life and death left in untold crisis, so near and so far without an answer. How could I have possibly walked away, and without my knowing, without even a last look back, with nothing to keep me going but the anonymity of her departure and the futility of her despair? I could not bear to be there, so unutterably left without her, while the very light of the day hurt as it assailed my soul, and as the end, pouring into the night, only to sheer away as though owing to tomorrow. Before and after were beyond recall, as a derelict building left to fall. But I walked away in the end, without any reason for doing so, and just as surely without looking back, even as it lay around me, the vestiges of your last year and all you had fought for. There, without you, the protest could only fail, as an empty building left to fall beyond repair. Without you, I could not prevail against the current of the day, seen as though in the distance far away, while all about me solid darkness lay. And so I faltered, fearing and afraid, mute with the weight of it all, unable to say what was then unutterable. What did I do to all? Yet it was all in the diffidence that faltered. The end, and then its outlasting disparity, infinity that would overwhelm me in its wake, leaving me to suddenly forsake even my own integrity, as I ran away, unable to stay without her, even for another day, leaving her behind as if forever buried, as unforgotten, ungathered remnants in my mind. For I could not say, deep within the darkness then, what it was like in the full light of an empty day, left there without her, fearing and afraid. The unshiftable weight of the unsaid was a burden too heavy to carry, leaving me no choice but to lay it down, to stay and wait alone for yesterday in the time to come. In order to say what could not be said, I would have to walk away from my own dread, and with the mouth of a ventriloquist speak as the mute voice of the living dead. I let you down without my knowing, just by not showing. The lane would be full to overflowing with the empty air, and your absence there without an end. Words cannot put it right, but you would not go into that good night. Beneath the show of a last bravado, I was as someone mortally afraid. The last night had come, and I couldn't go on stage any more. The curtain would rise before it was over, to memory alone, something once and seen in passing to and fro, that would not be seen again, that was destined to fade into its own shadow. Nothing in the world could save it, however much Gertrude had tried, while she lived and died, taking it with her after, as if she knew it would founder without her. The rest is left behind, a trial of words stamped with the longing of exile. But I never felt fear when you were there, you who had come to know me more than I knew myself, were always at the helm. In the front row of the auditorium, or simply there beside me every day. So short the time that was left, we had no way of knowing, months that were made to last a lifetime through. How I miss you there in everything I do, and there is no way to tell you that I could not even cry. I see your face where there is no other, beckoning through it all, as good as new, left with your last unanswerable why, as I beseech the world to hear your cry. But they didn't listen then, Gertrude. Why should they now? And your last year, in fact, was in vain. Something resembling the music playing when a ship went down in the dark. You tried to live for as long as you could, and for us, even then as it reared up before you, and without any warning, not once did we see you waving goodbye. Yet you must have known how near it was to the end. Sometimes you were as one looking out with a fixed gaze, far beyond the rim of this world, borne along on an ebb tide. When it came, you wanted only to die, lost to yourself and still too stunned to cry. There is little that I can relate to now, and empty is the meaning of this world, the struggle day by day, just to start again, lost within the ruins around me, stretching into infinity, yet knowing with a growing knowledge that it is already too late. There is no known relief for the heart waylaid and besieged by grief, for a mind engulfed and too far out, drifting still and endlessly outwards at the uttermost rim of the age and language. I could only run aground. The ebb and flow of after and before, the limitless sound of the depths and the origin and the end, pounding onto the shore, the country of my own making, where I exist among the untold hours, rendering to another tomorrow yesterday that I am forced to borrow, salvaging indelible ruin for something lost and found, mute with a future without her, silent under the burden of the words about her, as though in vain as they break against the strain of it all. How shall I ever go back to the end, to a history I cannot amend, without her there to answer when I call? Those days and their kind are beyond recall. The world is smaller now that you are gone, and there is nothing left to go back to. An empty stage, the lights permanently on hold, and the auditorium lit and then left unsold, as though people passing to and fro remembered nothing. I thought to do it by walking away, but I could no more forget you than the child in my womb, or the poem that is your life, and something I must give away when its time has come. Love, that is the pain, that is not of this world, is not in vain, labouring to crown the finishing line, knowing she was not yours, she was not mine.